My life was shaped by a small, tightly knit community, where every face was familiar and every action seemed to echo endlessly through the years. Growing up, I always imagined my future would stay entwined with the town that raised me, a comforting constant in a world that often felt unpredictable. Back then, I believed in enduring friendships and unbreakable bonds, but life has a way of shattering the illusions we hold dear. As time passed, the friendships I once cherished crumbled under the weight of betrayal and time. Each fracture in those connections revealed truths I had been too naive to see. The reality of my relationships, far from the idealistic notions of childhood, left scars I would carry forever. Driving past the perfectly manicured lawns and grand monuments, the cemetery felt oddly reminiscent of the city's golf course. Though they lay in opposite directions, their design seemed strikingly similar. Returning to my hometown after 8 years stirred a strange mix of emotions. I had once believed I would spend my entire life here, but fate had other plans. This trip back was even more unsettling due to the reason behind it: a funeral for a man who had once been like a brother. As children, we were 4 inseparable friends, bound by a loyalty as strong as the musketeers we idolized. Now, I was the only one left unscathed by time and circumstance. If not for Jeff's mother reaching out, I might not have come at all. Uncertainty loomed as I wondered how old acquaintances would react to my presence. That unease faded when my wife, Amanda, gave me a reassuring smile. Our daughter, Amy, was more captivated by the lush grass than the gravity of where we were. Arriving at the service, I noticed fewer people than expected. Jeff had spent his entire life here. One would assume the turnout would be greater. Once a doctor, his later years had been marked by scandal and a prison sentence. His legacy was complicated. Stepping up to speak, I kept my words broad, focusing on loss, love, and the fleeting nature of life. The crowd reacted with polite applause, though 2 familiar faces stood out. Bert, the only surviving member of our childhood group besides me, was visibly worn down, leaning heavily on a cane. The other was a woman who looked far older than her years, weathered by a hard life. Her expression was a mixture of recognition and hesitation. Amanda instinctively placed herself between us, protective in a way that needed no explanation. My daughter's innocent remark about the woman's appearance, though unfiltered, carried an uncomfortable truth. Jeff's mother, grief-stricken, pleaded for me to stay a little longer, but I declined. Instead, I planned to visit my parents before heading to meet Bert at Mulligan's, our old haunt. He hinted that he had something important to tell me, something that couldn't wait another 8 years. As I sat in Mulligan's, memories of the past resurfaced. We had once been 4 men with promising careers and solid lives. Jeff, a doctor; Greg, a lawyer; Bert, a teacher; and I, an engineer. We had built lives, married women who either grew up with us or found their way into our world. I had married Julie, a childhood friend who had seamlessly become part of our tight-knit circle. Though our love wasn't instantaneous, we built a life with careful plans that ultimately crumbled. The past, despite being buried for years, still had a grip on me. The events of 8 years ago had shattered everything we once had, and no matter how much therapy I had undergone, it was Amanda who truly helped me hold on to my sense of self. She had her own past to escape from, and together we forged something new. Sitting there, waiting for Bert, I knew that what he had to say would only stir up the ghosts I had tried so hard to leave behind. But some things refused to stay buried. Every Sunday morning, I dedicated a few hours to my longest run of the week, a ritual that set the tone for the days ahead. That particular morning, as I jogged through the park at an easy pace, something caught my eye. The most perfectly sculpted legs I had ever seen. Strong yet graceful, they led to a figure that, despite my best efforts to focus on my run, completely distracted me. Before I realized what was happening, I had run straight into her. The moment our eyes met, my world shifted. It was Amanda, an old friend from my past. We spent the morning catching up, and if I hadn't altered my schedule for that conversation, my life might have taken a completely different course. By the time I got home, I was ready to tell my wife Julie about seeing Amanda again. I entered through the kitchen, as usual, avoiding tracking sweat into the living room where Julie kept everything pristine. But what I walked into was something I never could have expected. Julie was in bed with Greg, while Jeff and Bert stood nearby, waiting their turn. My closest friends, brothers in every sense but blood, were involved in something that shattered my reality in an instant. I didn't react immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone and captured undeniable proof of their betrayal. Julie, surprisingly unshaken, decided it was the perfect moment to make an announcement. She told them this would be their last time together, that she wanted to stop. My recent promotion meant I would no longer be traveling for work, and she was considering starting a family with me. She claimed that over time she had grown to love me, and she no longer wanted to continue this deception. Her words were met with scorn. Jeff, the orchestrator of it all, dismissed her concerns outright. He reminded her why she had married me in the first place, not for love, but for security. She had never wanted to work, and being with me had been the easiest way to ensure a comfortable life. To them, she was never truly my wife, just someone they all shared, with me as the last to have a claim on her. Greg and Bert chimed in, mocking her supposed change of heart. To them, she wasn't special, just the most convenient option. Even when she argued that she wanted a real life with me, they scoffed, telling her she was incapable of being a faithful wife. Jeff made it clear that if she refused to continue, there would be consequences. He threatened to tell me everything, confident that I would believe him over her. He even suggested sedating me to ensure I wouldn't catch them in the act. It was all so calculated, so devoid of remorse that it left me numb. I had heard enough. I knocked over a table as I slipped out the back door, unseen, and ran. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Julie, pretending nothing had happened. I answered, feigning normalcy, while my mind raced. An hour later, I walked back into the house. The others had left, and Julie greeted me as if everything was fine. She offered to rub my sore legs, suggested we sit in the spa together, all while pretending to be the devoted wife she had never truly been. I declined, unable to stomach her presence. Sitting alone in the spa, I tried to make sense of everything. The life I thought I had was a lie. My best friends had betrayed me. My wife had never loved me, only tolerated me for what I provided. Apart from my parents, there was no one I could truly trust. For the first time, I saw my life for what it was. There was only one path forward. I had to leave Julie and start over. Divorce was the only answer. The thought of walking away from the years I had invested in her stung, but the pain of staying was far worse. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Nothing could distract me now. I was done living in a lie.
At 31, my life had veered far from what I had planned. I was married to a wonderful man, but not for the right reasons. 9 years ago, everything changed when Liam and his friends graduated from college. Liam had always been different from the others. He was attractive, probably the most good-looking of the group. But he had spent his last years in college heartbroken over Amanda, the girlfriend who had chosen a convent over him. Unlike Jeff, Greg, and Bert, who I had been with multiple times, I barely knew Liam. Jeff was the one who brought us together. He had once been my main prospect for marriage, but then he met Paula, and with her stunning figure, I never stood a chance. With Jeff moving on, I had no clear path forward. My mother suggested I get a job, but the thought of waiting tables horrified me. Jeff had always been generous in sharing money, connections, even women. He didn't mind introducing me to other guys, as long as he still had his place in my life. When I told him I needed a secure future, he had an idea. Liam was still single, and Jeff saw an opportunity. He wanted all of them to settle down together, and Liam was the last piece of the puzzle. More importantly, Jeff believed in the idea of public domain, meaning I belonged to all of them, and if I married one of them, their arrangement could continue without suspicion. Their wives would never question them visiting Liam. I knew it was wrong, but it was easy. A marriage of convenience meant I wouldn't have to work. Greg even advised me to stay married to Liam for 5 or 6 years before divorcing him. After that, I could claim alimony and live comfortably without effort. It was a brilliant plan. I strategized carefully. I would win Liam over with love, then slowly withdraw from him, making it easier when the time came to leave. But there was one flaw in the plan: Liam himself. He was the kindest man I had ever met. At first, we were more friends than lovers, but I genuinely enjoyed spending time with him. When we finally married, I couldn't believe how thoughtful he was. He listened to me, cared about my happiness, and gave me gifts for no reason. Our honeymoon changed everything. Unlike the other men, Liam was patient, gentle, and focused on what made me happy. For the first time, intimacy wasn't just an act. It meant something. Over time, I realized I actually had feelings for him. It wasn't love, not yet, but I liked being with him. Even after we married, I continued my affairs. At the time, I felt no guilt. I justified it as part of our arrangement, maintaining a balance, spending time with Liam after every encounter with someone else. The others had their own appeal, but with Liam, it was different. When the 5-year mark came, Greg asked if I was ready to start the divorce proceedings. I hesitated. I told him it was better to wait and see if Liam made a mistake that would give me an easy way out. Deep down, I knew Liam would never do anything wrong. The truth was, I didn't want to leave him. The years passed, and my feelings grew stronger. 6 months ago, I made my decision. I would stay with Liam forever. I would finally commit, end my affairs, and be the wife he deserved. I wanted a child, and it had to be his. I planned to cut ties with the others, break free from the arrangement, and start a real life with my husband. But that didn't happen. As Liam walked through the door that day, I could tell something was wrong. At first, I assumed he had injured himself running, but then he mentioned turning down a promotion. That wasn't like him. A sense of unease crept over me. I had been planning to talk to the others, suggest a pause in our arrangement so I could stop taking birth control and get pregnant with Liam's child. But now, everything was unraveling, and I had no idea why.
At 33, I realized I had wasted nearly half my life on people who never deserved my loyalty. The betrayal by Julie, Jeff, Bert, and Greg wasn't something I could forgive. They had taken everything from me, and I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. I spent the next few days figuring out my course of action. The first step was gathering information. Since Julie didn't own a cell phone, I installed a recorder on the home phone to track her conversations. Meanwhile, I met with several lawyers who all gave me the same disappointing news. A divorce would likely cost me half of everything I owned. That wasn't an option. If I had to stay married for a while to find a better solution, so be it. I started with Bert. He had been the least hostile, so his punishment would be the lightest. Through back channels, I learned where to find someone willing to rough up a target for cash. After carefully covering my tracks, I arranged for Bert to get beaten. By me. I paid a bartender to set it up, ensuring there were enough layers between me and the act that no one could trace it back to me. A few nights later, I caught Bert leaving his usual bar. It was dark, and I wore a ski mask. He wasn't drunk, so he had a fair chance. I gave him an opportunity to fight back, but he didn't stand a chance. The next day, Jeff called, informing me that Bert had been attacked. We gathered at the hospital, where Bert, barely able to speak through the pain, told the detective he had been jumped at random. He insisted it must have been mistaken identity since he'd never done anything wrong to anyone. After the police left, I eavesdropped on a private conversation between Bert, Jeff, and Greg. Bert admitted there were actually 2 attackers, though only one seemed to enjoy it. He suspected it had something to do with the brother of a woman he had been sleeping with. I returned to the room and acted outraged, suggesting we take revenge for Bert. They looked at me strangely, but agreed to meet for golf the next day. As I left, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Bert would never play competitively again. His injuries meant his dreams of setting the club record were over. Next, I moved on to Jeff. He owned a clinic, and every year when he traveled, I handled his mail and deliveries. Using the key he had given me, I entered the storage room where he kept medical files and doused it in gasoline. I set up a faulty iron and a printer with exposed wiring, connected them to a timer, and created a slow-burning fuse leading to the fuel. The clinic was closed on Sundays, so the fire would start while we were on the golf course. It would be ruled an accident, and Jeff would lose years of records and money. To add another layer, I used a voice changer on a burner phone and left an anonymous threat, making it look like Jeff had unpaid debts that led to the fire. Then, I disposed of the evidence and went home. Julie was waiting, pretending everything was fine. She had no idea what was coming. Over the past few days, I had noticed her drinking more, likely due to my growing distance. She had lost her power over me and felt trapped. Once, she had willingly played the role they assigned her, but now, with the guys openly disrespecting her and me pulling away, she was unraveling. During dinner, I made sure her glass was never empty. When she became drunk enough, she started probing, asking if I still found her attractive, if Amanda was prettier, if Paula had better bosoms. She panicked when I casually mentioned seeing Amanda in town. Even in her intoxicated state, she knew something was changing. She tried to seduce me, clinging to the one power she had left. I helped her to bed, undressing her as she mumbled about how much she loved me. I said nothing. If she expected me to reciprocate, she was in for disappointment. Lying there, watching her drift into unconsciousness, I felt nothing but cold determination. One by one, they would all pay, and I was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up before Julie, rolling over beside her. When she stirred, I pretended to be asleep, watching as she turned to me with a sleepy smile. Feigning grogginess, I murmured about how great last night had been. She hesitated, clearly confused. She remembered me carrying her to bed but had no recollection of anything else. Instead of admitting it, she played along, claiming it had been incredible and suggesting we do it again. When she moved closer, I panicked and jumped out of bed, making excuses about needing to be on the golf course. I rushed through my morning routine, grabbed my clubs, and left, leaving her standing there, deep in thought, trying to piece together a night that had never happened. At the golf course, I arrived early, had a quick breakfast, and practiced while waiting for Jeff and Greg. When they finally showed up, Greg eyed me suspiciously, but I brushed it off with a joke. We played 6 holes before I suggested a break for lunch. As we sat at the club, debating whether to raise our bets, an employee rushed over, telling Jeff his wife was on the phone. He answered with a smirk, expecting some trivial issue, but his face dropped as he listened. His clinic had burned down. Jeff was in shock. I played the concerned friend, offering to go with him. Greg and I followed as he sped to what remained of his office. Paula was already there, speaking to the authorities. Jeff's expression was priceless. Rage, disbelief, then a flicker of realization. The fire chief explained that it had started in a storage room full of paper, likely from a faulty appliance. Witnesses had seen smoke around 10 in the morning. Jeff quickly provided his alibi, playing golf with us, along with a 4th man who could confirm it. By 8:30, the clinic was nothing but ashes. Jeff had lost everything. His expensive medical equipment, still being paid off, was gone. At first, he seemed to accept the loss, considering ways to manipulate the insurance payout to his advantage. Then reality hit. He didn't have fire insurance. By the time the firefighters cleared out, Jeff was kneeling in the rubble, a broken man. Greg turned to me, unsettled by my calm demeanor. When I smiled, a shiver ran through him. He mumbled something about things being broken. I told him not yet. He got the message and left. I had plans for Greg, but first, I needed to deal with Julie. That evening, I went to the park, where I had destroyed the last traces of my voice changer. I searched for someone who fit my needs. Desperate, but useful. The first man I approached wanted a helping hand, not a handout. Useless. The second, however, had the hardened look I was searching for. He wasn't homeless. He had simply walked away from society, refusing to work just to hand his earnings over to an ex-wife. When I asked if he wanted revenge, he introduced himself as Melvin and said he was all in. We struck a deal. He would get paid up front for his first task, then collect the rest through the legal fallout. Back home, Julie was already drunk, barely able to stand. When I mentioned Jeff's clinic, she laughed, slurring that he deserved it before realizing she was supposed to act concerned. Then suddenly she shifted. She wanted to know why I had been distant, why I no longer loved her. I poured her another drink, laced with the sleeping pills Jeff had once given me. She rambled about having 2 theories. One, that I was cheating on her with Amanda. She had heard from people who saw us together. I reminded her that I had told her about meeting Amanda. She barely processed it before moving to her second theory, claiming she had done something terrible, something that might make me stop loving her. Before she could say what, the pills took effect. Her words slurred, her body sagged, and she collapsed into a chair, muttering nonsense about roasting marshmallows over Jeff's clinic fire before finally passing out. I had one last task for the night. Melvin followed me outside, where I showed him Julie's car. He knew what to do. On my signal, he sprinted full force and crashed into the front of it, hard enough to trigger the airbag. He tumbled to the ground, dazed and bruised. We pushed the car onto the lawn at an odd angle, making it look like an accident. Then I called the police and reported Julie missing. They told me I had to wait 24 hours before filing a report. I drove Melvin to a nearby park where his friends were waiting. As soon as we pulled up, they started shouting, drawing attention. I watched from my rearview mirror as a bystander stopped to investigate, phone in hand. The call to the police would come soon. Everything was falling into place. When I got home, I carefully set the stage. Julie was still unconscious, so I placed her in the driver's seat, making it look like she had passed out at the wheel. I rubbed some airbag residue onto her face, spilled alcohol on her clothes, and left an open bottle beside her. With everything in place, I slipped the keys into the ignition and went inside to sleep. At 3 a.m., loud knocking and flashing red and blue lights jolted me awake. 2 patrol cars sat in my driveway. I answered the door, pretending to be groggy, acting as if I had spent the night worrying about Julie's disappearance. The officers explained that they had found her. She had apparently missed the driveway, ended up on the lawn, and had been heavily intoxicated. Worse, witnesses saw her hit a pedestrian and speed off, laughing as she shouted at the victim. The man was now in the hospital. I feigned outrage, blaming the police for not finding her sooner and even hinting at legal action. It didn't matter. They were taking her in. As they pulled her from the car, she muttered drunken nonsense about us, making one officer shake his head in pity. Hours later, my phone rang. Julie, now sobered up and panicked, begged me to get her out of jail. I called her parents and arranged to meet them at the station. When we arrived, I learned the bail was set at $200,000, meaning I had to put down $20,000 to get her out. Her father, clearly frustrated, muttered about how reckless she had always been, while her mother made weak excuses for her behavior. I kept my role intact, pretending to be the concerned husband, agreeing to pay the bond even though it would cut our savings in half. On the drive home, she tried to apologize, but I remained silent. I pointed out that she had cost us nearly everything. Our savings were drained, her car was impounded, her license was suspended. She would be stuck at home for the foreseeable future. As we arrived, she grabbed a package from the doorstep, the one I had planted. She hesitated, staring at it, and I knew she understood exactly what it contained. Once I got to work, I made a detour, stopping at an out-of-the-way gas station. I bought a burner phone and a voice changer, making sure no cameras recorded me. After setting everything up, I dialed her number. When she answered, I knew she had already seen the package. I deepened my voice through the modulator, demanding $40,000 to keep quiet. She tried to negotiate, claiming she couldn't withdraw that much after her bail. Then, as if she still had leverage, she suggested an alternative, offering me a cut of what her lovers had paid her. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my tone calm. She thought she could bargain her way out of this. I shut her down. She would take the money, put it in a gym bag, and leave it on a park bench by 4 p.m. If she followed instructions, this would be over. If not, another copy of the evidence would be delivered, this time directly to me. After hanging up, I met with the realtor. I played my part, acting like a betrayed husband, desperate to escape humiliation. I told her to sell the house fast, accepting any reasonable offer. This wasn't about profit. It was about cutting all ties. At 3:15, my phone buzzed. A large withdrawal had been made from our account. Everything was falling into place. I called Melvin. He answered, groaning in fake agony. "Cut the act," I said. "It's me." At 3:50, I met Steve near the park where Julie was supposed to drop the bag. I handed him half of a $50 bill, keeping the other half as proof of payment upon completion. He walked through the park, arriving at the bench just as Julie placed the bag down and walked away. Once she was gone, he retrieved it and returned to me. Inside the bag, I found nothing but Julie's old clothes and underwear. She had tried to play it smart, but it didn't matter. I had what I needed for the divorce. Steve, realizing he had made the best deal, took the money and disappeared. I arrived home at the usual time. Julie avoided my gaze but apologized, claiming she had no memory of getting into the car. I played along, suggesting she see a doctor. She casually floated the idea that she might be pregnant. When I asked who the father was, she laughed it off, claiming it could only be me. Then, as if nothing had happened, she hinted at rekindling our intimacy. I dismissed her with the excuse that she still smelled like alcohol. Later that evening, her parents came over. Her father, in private, confided that Julie had started drinking again. I feigned shock and assured him I would talk to her. By the time they left, I had cemented my image as the concerned, devoted husband. That night, I poured a strong drink laced with sleeping pills and watched as her eyelids grew heavy. Once she was fully unconscious, I carried her upstairs and placed her in bed. Then I prepared my next move. The staircase to our bedroom had varnished wooden steps with metal framing and safety bars. By removing the first and third steps from the top, I set the perfect trap. A few empty bottles placed around the kitchen and living room would complete the scene. The next morning, I carefully dribbled alcohol onto Julie's lips and shook her awake just enough for her to stir. Then, making sure to avoid the missing steps, I rushed downstairs, slammed the door loudly, and left for work, purposefully leaving my briefcase behind. As expected, the noise jolted her fully awake. Disoriented, she got out of bed, stepped out of the room, and fell down the stairs. It was a long drop, and she deserved every bruise. I waited 5 minutes before re-entering the house, acting as if I had forgotten my briefcase. Julie lay at the bottom of the stairs, moaning in pain. I rushed to her side, expressing concern, then called emergency services. She insisted she didn't know how it happened, claiming she used those stairs every day without issue. As the paramedics assessed her injuries, they discreetly told me they suspected she had been drinking again. Her right shoulder was dislocated, her right ankle was broken, and both wrists were sprained. She also had a mild head injury. At the hospital, her parents arrived. Her father, exasperated, admitted that Julie's drinking was becoming a financial burden. He couldn't afford to keep leaving work to deal with her problems. He suggested they send her somewhere for treatment. Then, with a bewildered look, he mentioned something strange. Julie had told the doctors that the stairs had disappeared and then reappeared. I played the part of the supportive husband, assuring him that everything would be fine. Her parents saw me as the only stable force in her life. As the police arrived to question Julie about the sleeping pills found in her system, I stepped out, checking my watch. My father-in-law noticed and told me to go to work, assuring me they would stay with her. I left the hospital and made several calls. My lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers were ready to be served. The real estate agent was confident the house would sell by the end of the week, with multiple showings scheduled. Everything was moving according to plan. Then Amanda's call came through. She wanted to meet for lunch before she left town. I agreed, making a mental note of how ironic it was. She had been the start of my downfall, and now she was appearing just as I was about to break free. At work, my boss pulled me aside with an unexpected offer. A promotion in the Chicago office was available, along with a significant bonus and salary increase. It was exactly what I needed, a fresh start, away from the ghosts of this town. As I considered my future, my phone rang again. It was my father-in-law. The police were threatening to arrest Julie. I drove back to the hospital, pushing my Mustang to its limits. Inside, chaos awaited. The detective handling her case had discovered that her toxicology report showed more than just alcohol. There were illegal substances in her system. If she didn't cooperate, they would charge her with both possession and the hit and run. I knew exactly how to play this. I turned to the detective, cold and unwavering. I reminded him that if the police had done their job when I first reported Julie missing, none of this would have happened. I let my anger show, just enough to convince everyone in the room that I was a husband pushed to his breaking point. Julie's parents saw me as their daughter's last hope. The detective saw me as a man desperate to protect his wife. They had no idea I was the one orchestrating every move. A detective should be someone who uncovers patterns, solves crimes, and maybe even prevents them. Instead, the one standing before me was little more than a lazy bureaucrat, pressing a woman too broken to defend herself. He insisted he wasn't looking to charge Julie, but needed to know where she got the pills to stop them from circulating. If she didn't talk, he'd be forced to consider her complicit in protecting her supplier. I made him swear, in front of witnesses, that if she revealed the source, she wouldn't be charged. Once he agreed, I told him exactly where the pills had come from. I played the video on my phone, skipping past the closeness to the moment Jeff handed Julie the sleeping pills, instructing her to pills me so they could take turns with her. When the recording ended, silence filled the room. The shock was written on everyone's faces, disgust, pity, even disbelief. Julie tried to deny it at first, then switched tactics, claiming she had been lost, but now loved me. Her mother was horrified, her father furious. They left, unable to face what their daughter had become. Even the nurses and other officers disappeared, as if wanting to escape the stench of her disgrace. The detective took my phone, confirming Jeff Martin as the supplier. Then, before leaving, he stationed an officer outside Julie's room, reminding her that despite her release on bail, she was still under investigation. As he turned to go, he muttered his condolences, and for once it sounded genuine. Now alone with Julie, I saw the panic in her eyes. She wanted to know how long I had known. I lied, telling her I had only just found out after paying a stranger for the video. She cursed the blackmailer, admitting she had already paid $20,000 to keep it hidden. I broke the news. Between her bail, legal fees, and the money wasted on covering her tracks, we were broke. She tried to convince me we could rebuild, that she would change. But she made one mistake, assuming I still cared. I told her plainly, I would not stay married to her. Her panic exploded into hysteria, her vitals spiking, machines blaring as she begged me to reconsider. I felt nothing. She had never given me a choice when she betrayed me. Now, she had no choice either. Without another word, I turned and walked away, feeling nothing but satisfaction. At that moment, I was done with Julie, but not with Jeff. I shifted my focus to lunch with Amanda, pushing aside thoughts of revenge just for a while. I arrived at Texas Roadhouse before she did. When she walked in, heads turned. Amanda was never the type to draw immediate attention, but there was something effortlessly beautiful about her. And when she smiled at me, every man in the room knew they were invisible. Our waiter, who had ignored me just minutes earlier, appeared instantly, eager to take our orders. I smirked at his sudden enthusiasm, but let it slide. Amanda, however, had something weighing on her mind. I pushed her to get to the point, and after some back and forth, she admitted she had something important to say. She began by explaining that before college, she had been torn between two dreams, becoming a teacher or dedicating her life to the church. She had always had questions about love, relationships, and intimacy, but never had the opportunity to explore them. Her aunt had advised her to experience life before committing fully to God. Amanda admitted that she had chosen me as the man to share that experience with, believing I was safe, that there would be no strings attached. Hearing this felt like a punch to the gut. I had spent 2 years grieving, believing I had lost the love of my life, when in reality, I had just been a convenient test run for her. My anger flared. I told her the truth. She had broken me. While she had walked away to pursue her dream, I had been left in pieces, barely finishing school, drowning in heartbreak. She tried to explain, but I had no patience for it. I slammed my fist on the table, the weight of betrayal hitting me all over again. The moment felt surreal. I had come to this lunch expecting some form of closure, but instead, I was confronting the past in a way I never had before. I ordered a drink, needing something stronger than water to swallow the bitterness. Amanda, suddenly uncertain, whispered that maybe meeting had been a mistake. I wasn't so sure. Amanda's tears shattered the composed image I had always associated with her. She wasn't the untouchable, serene woman anymore. Just the girl I'd grown up with, the friend I had once loved. Without hesitation, I stepped around the table and wrapped my arms around her. She broke down, admitting she had made a terrible mistake. She had loved me back then, but hadn't realized it. She compared herself to a child dreaming of being a race car driver, only to discover they couldn't even handle a basic turn. She had convinced herself that her path was clear, but after graduating, she found herself drawn back home, hoping to see me, to figure out if what we had was real. But by the time she returned, I was already married. She took it as a sign that we were never meant to be and left for the monastery, immersing herself in her new life. She had convinced herself she was happy teaching children, but over the years, she came to a painful realization. She didn't just want to work with kids, she wanted her own. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted she might never have had true faith, that everything she had believed in was unraveling. Then, as if the weight of it all was too much, she abruptly stood up and left. I sat there in stunned silence, processing her confession, when the waiter, completely oblivious to my state, arrived with our food. Before I could even sigh in frustration, a sultry southern voice interrupted. "This for me?" I looked up to find Paula standing over me, her low-cut blouse making it clear she had no interest in subtlety. She sat down and started eating Amanda's steak without hesitation, acting as if she had been invited. Paula had just come from the courthouse, dealing with the aftermath of Jeff's arrest. He had been caught distributing unprescribed controlled substances, an arrest that was long overdue. With their clinic burned down, their debts piling up, and now a criminal charge hanging over him, he had officially lost everything. She laughed bitterly, but her next words caught me off guard. "So, are we going to have closeness or not?" I just stared. Paula was blunt. She laid out everything she had learned. Jeff, my supposed best friend, had not only been sleeping with Julie, but had deliberately orchestrated my marriage so they could keep using her. He had convinced himself he was doing me a favor, pulling me out of my depression and ensuring I wouldn't be alone. But the truth was much simpler. He wanted easy access to a woman he didn't respect enough to marry, but was willing to use whenever he wanted. Her anger boiled over as she recounted his justification. He had told her that Julie was nothing more than an object for fulfilling desires he wouldn't subject his wife to. She wasn't beautiful enough for him to consider as a lifelong partner, but she was convenient. He had even bragged about degrading her in ways Paula could hardly stomach. Paula finished Amanda's steak, then eyed mine. Without hesitation, she took my plate and started eating. Her bitterness ran deep. But she wasn't just looking for comfort. She wanted revenge. She wanted to give Jeff a taste of his own medicine, to destroy him in the same way he had humiliated us. Her plan was simple. She wanted to record us together and send the footage straight to his jail cell. I set my fork down and looked her in the eyes. Paula, you deserve better than what you've been given. But revenge like this won't fix anything. It'll only bring us down to their level. You should be with someone who loves and respects you, not using love as a tool against Jeff. She broke down, burying her face in my shoulder. For the second time that day, I comforted a crying woman who had been deeply wronged by the same people who had betrayed me. She wasn't ready to forgive, and neither was I. But there were better ways to get even. I paid for our meal and left Paula at the restaurant, heading straight for the prison. Jeff was already waiting for me when I arrived, shackled to the floor of the small holding room. His smug confidence vanished the moment he saw my expression. "Liam," he started, trying to sound remorseful. "I'm so sorry." I cut him off. "Sorry for what, Jeff? Sorry that you got caught. Sorry that you sedated me so you could have closeness with my wife. Sorry that you manipulated me into marrying her so you could keep using her. Or are you just sorry that now you're the one suffering?" He stammered, scrambling for an excuse, but I didn't let him speak. "You know, Paula came to see me," I continued. "And you know what she wanted? She wanted us to make a little video for you to watch in here. A real private show. I almost said yes." Jeff's face paled. "You wouldn't?" I leaned in, my voice cold. "Wouldn't I?" "Paula is furious. She drained your bank accounts, left you with nothing, and she's ready to burn whatever's left of your life to the ground. The only reason I didn't go through with it is because I refused to become like you." I let the silence hang between us, watching the weight of my words sink in. "Enjoy prison, Jeff. You deserve every second of it." I turned and walked out, leaving him to rot. I left Jeff behind, his screams of desperation echoing as the guard locked the door behind me. With the police breathing down his neck, it was only a matter of time before he was charged with arson. Next, I headed to the hospital to see Bert. The moment I walked in, I heard him crying. His eyes met mine, full of shame. I confronted him, asking why he had betrayed me. He immediately blamed Jeff, claiming he and Greg had just followed along. Jeff had laughed at me for years, treating my marriage like a running joke. They had reveled in my ignorance, knowing I believed Julie was a faithful wife when she had been nothing more than their shared plaything. Bert wasn't just broken mentally, he had lost everything. The brutal beating had left him permanently damaged, unable to swing a golf club again. His wife had left him, not because of the affair, but because he could no longer have children. Elaine had been desperate for a family, and once that future was gone, so was she. He sobbed, claiming fate had stripped him of everything. I felt no sympathy. Fate hadn't stolen my life, my so-called friends had. Julie appeared behind me, trying to spin everything into a second chance. She insisted we had only lost money, that we could recover, rebuild, and pretend none of this had ever happened. She swore she loved me now, that she finally appreciated me. I ignored her, instead asking about Greg. That's when she dropped another bombshell. Greg had disappeared. His wife, Tina, had stormed in earlier, furious and ready to fight, only to discover he had emptied half their bank account and vanished without a trace. Julie tried again, pushing her fantasy of reconciliation. "No one stole me from you," she insisted. I laughed bitterly. "No one had to. You were never mine to begin with." She pleaded, but I had made up my mind. I told her the divorce papers would be ready in a few days. We would split the house sale, deducting the money wasted on her bail and lawyer. If we got $80,000, she would walk away with only $20,000. Julie lost it. "That's not fair," she shrieked. I broke it down for her. Our bank account had been drained. Half of it was mine, and all of it had gone to fixing her mistakes. She owed me. She tried another angle, arguing that our home was worth more. I explained I wasn't looking to maximize profits. I just wanted out. I wanted to leave this town where everyone knew, where I would always be the man whose wife had slept with his friends. Desperate, she refused to accept the divorce. She suggested counseling, a trial separation, anything to drag it out. I shut her down. She tried comparing us to her aunt, a woman who had spent decades forgiving an unfaithful husband, clinging to a marriage that had never been real. I made it clear I wasn't that kind of fool. Julie then tried to twist things, repeating what Jeff had told her. He had spun it all like he had done me a favor, pulling me out of depression, ensuring I had a wife to care for me. In his mind, He had done what was best for everyone, but the truth was simpler. Jeff had never respected her enough to marry her himself, but he wanted to keep her close, keep her available. Unlike real relationships where love and emotions complicated things, Julie was just an easy option, a woman who would do whatever he wanted without question. "I really do love you," she whispered, grasping at straws. I saw it for what it was: survival instinct. She didn't want to lose the comfort, the security I had provided. I asked her one final question. "When we stood in front of our friends and family and you told me you loved me, was it ever real?" She hesitated, then shook her head. That was all I needed. I gave her a choice: sign the no-fault divorce and leave with some dignity, or I would drag her through court, expose everything, and ensure she walked away with nothing. In a town like ours, reputation was everything. Tears streamed down her face as she begged, promising she would change, that she would be faithful now. But it wasn't her choice anymore. Greg had run. Bert was crippled. Jeff was behind bars. Julie was alone. I turned to leave. "The papers will be ready in a day or two. When they are, just sign them, Julie. Let it die." If she was discharged from the hospital before I left town, she could stay with her parents. I would make arrangements so she could collect her things before I was gone for good. I didn't look back. I accepted the job in Chicago without hesitation, securing the relocation bonus and preparing for the move. A quick trip to the new office and a meeting with a realtor set things in motion. When I returned home, exhaustion weighed on me, but I made one last visit to Julie's parents. Her mother, in tears, asked if there was any way to salvage the marriage. I told her I had tried, but the betrayal had been too much. The worst part wasn't just that Julie had slept with my friends. It was knowing that she had never loved me. We parted with hugs, and they agreed to collect her belongings the next day. The marriage I had believed in for years had come to a bitter, inevitable end. Julie served nearly a year in prison for the DUI and hit and run, on top of a suspended sentence for substance-related charges. Melvin sued her and won, wiping out every cent of her divorce settlement. Broke and disgraced, she found herself working in fast food just to repay her parents. By the time I left town, no one wanted anything to do with her. Jeff faced his own reckoning. The arson investigation led to criminal charges, adding to his illegal prescription case. He spent 6 years in prison, followed by a year on parole. Paula divorced him and drained every asset before he could even fight back. Once released, he had nothing left, ending up in the same homeless shelter where Melvin had once stayed. No one there pitied him. They were tired of his endless claims that he had once been a doctor. Bert struggled through years of rehab before attempting to return to teaching. The damage to his body was permanent, leaving him with a limp and a barely functional arm. His wife remarried within a year of my departure, starting the family he would never be able to have. Melvin, however, turned his misfortune into something meaningful. He used his settlement money to start a temp agency, helping the homeless find work and stability. Over time, he moved past his resentment toward women and even remarried. Against all odds, he built a new life for himself. Tina filed for divorce from Greg and was awarded their home and remaining assets. She also filed complaints with the Bar Association, aiming to destroy his legal career. On the day I was set to leave town, I received an unexpected call from Greg. He claimed to regret his part in everything, but admitted he had left because he saw what had happened to the others. Unlike them, he was smart enough to get out before it was too late. He made it clear he would never return, leaving Tina with everything while he started over somewhere else. He didn't regret sleeping with Julie, only betraying our friendship. Then he hung up. Anger consumed me. Of all of them, Greg's escape enraged me the most. I couldn't let him walk away. Chicago was a fresh start, but Greg remained in my mind. I hired private investigators to track him down. After months of waiting, they found him in Detroit. Using a fake name, he worked for a legal website and lived in a rundown apartment in a neighborhood where no one asked questions. I went there, waiting in the shadows as he arrived home. He cursed at his surroundings, clearly miserable. When I stepped into the light, he froze. Panic flashed across his face. He had always relied on his intelligence to stay ahead, but this time, he had nowhere to run. I handed him a bottle of vodka, and he drank without hesitation. Alcohol had always been his weakness. As the night wore on, he rambled about his past, revealing how he had wanted Julie since college and how easily he had gone along with Jeff's plan. After hours of drinking, his words slurred and his body sagged. I handed him a paper, and he signed without question. He never even asked what it was. I walked away, leaving him to rot in the life he had created for himself. Revenge was complete, and I was finally free. I orchestrated Greg's downfall carefully, ensuring no trace led back to me. His drunken mumbling about Julia was incoherent, filled with meaningless apologies I had no interest in hearing. He barely processed the document I'd typed from his own computer before signing it with unsteady hands. As he laughed off the idea of ending his own life, I remained silent, only giving a subtle nod. The weight of the loaded Colt on the table went unnoticed in his intoxicated haze. Making sure I left nothing behind, I wiped every surface I had touched, then walked out, leaving him alone with his choices. I hadn't planned to push him that far, but he had it coming. My original intent was only to strip him of his legal career, but he made his own bed, and I had no sympathy. I took an indirect route back to Chicago, traveling through Port Huron to avoid any clear link between my departure and Greg's inevitable fate. The 6-hour bus ride gave me time to reflect, though I felt nothing resembling guilt. Movies and books had conditioned me to expect some sense of remorse, but all I felt was relief. That chapter of my life was finally closed. Back in my apartment, I laughed at the sight of my still unpacked boxes. I had lived there for months, but never settled in, as if subconsciously knowing it was just a transition. I had narrowed my home search to a few options, but hadn't committed. My phone had several missed calls, 4 from Julie, likely desperate attempts to reach me from prison. Her parents had called as well, no doubt hoping to convince me to forgive her. I was done with those conversations. The remaining 2 calls were from an unknown number, and curiosity got the better of me. The voice that answered was unmistakable, familiar yet carrying a depth I hadn't heard before. Amanda. She spoke of doubts, of choices made for the wrong reasons, and of the mistakes nuns were just as capable of making as anyone else. She admitted she had been unsatisfied for years, questioning her path but unwilling to face the truth. As she spoke, it became clear she had returned to town before taking her vows, not to reflect but to see if there was still a chance for us. When she found I had married, she took it as a sign that we were never meant to be. But she had been wrong. She confessed that after leaving the restaurant that day, she had spent hours speaking to old friends, piecing together how much she had hurt me. She asked why I had never told her how I felt, why I had kept my love for her to myself. I reminded her that it had always been obvious. I had supported her choices because I believed they made her happy, even when they shattered me. Love, to me, meant wanting the best for her, even at my own expense. There was a long silence before she finally admitted she was no longer a nun. Then, she asked the question that had been buried beneath years of missed chances. Did I still want her? More than anything. Amanda moved to Chicago to be with me, and we never looked back. We found comfort in each other easily, as if time had never separated us. We never dwelled on the past, never asked questions that didn't need answers. She hinted at things she had seen in the church that troubled her, things she didn't want to discuss, and I never pressed. Likewise, I never told her the full extent of what had happened with my divorce. We understood each other without the need for explanations. 6 months later, we married. We never returned to our hometown. There was nothing left for us there. A voice pulled me from my thoughts. Bert sat across from me, looking older, worn. He had said something, but I had been lost in memory. He leaned in, speaking softly. He had been thinking about everything for years, and he had finally realized the truth. He knew it was me. I had destroyed Jeff's life, burned down his clinic. He had spent years coming up with theories, karma, bad luck, justice. But in the end, he knew. His eyes locked onto mine, waiting for a response. Bert didn't need to spell it out. I knew he had pieced everything together. He had lost everything. His ability to play golf, his marriage, and his career. He believed I was responsible for it all. While Jeff rotted in prison and Greg's death was ruled a self-destruction, Bert was the last one left. But instead of gratitude for being spared, he resented me more than anyone. He accused me of orchestrating his downfall, linking the attack on him to the bartender I had spoken to in a neighboring town. The connection wasn't obvious, but he had spent years putting the pieces together. He saw my success, moving to a better city, landing a higher-paying job, marrying Amanda, and he knew I had come out of it all unscathed. He called Julia public property, dismissing any claim I had ever had to her, but I reminded him that when I married her, she was mine. He scoffed, convinced it had been nothing more than an elaborate joke at my expense. He wanted to know why he was still alive, why I hadn't destroyed him like the others. I played dumb, laughed off his suspicions, and told him it was all just a streak of bad luck. Maybe guilt had caught up with them. Maybe fate had a way of balancing things out. But Bert didn't buy it. He knew the truth, even if he couldn't prove it. As I stood to leave, I spotted Julia waiting for me. She looked different, older, humbled. She apologized, saying she regretted everything and wished she had given our marriage a real chance. Seeing Amanda and our daughter had broken something inside her, a reminder of what she had thrown away. She said she would do anything to make up for it. For the first time in years, I believed her. I hugged her, told her I forgave her, and walked away. I barely had time to register what happened next. A sudden impact, the pavement rushing toward me, the deafening crack of a loud blast. Julia was hit too. Chaos erupted as people ran for cover. By the time the police arrived, an ambulance was already on the way. I escaped with bruises, but Julia was in critical condition. Amanda and I stayed by her side in the hospital, refusing to leave until she recovered. When she was finally discharged, she had nowhere to go, so we brought her to Chicago. She lived with us until she was back on her feet. Over time, my daughter started calling her Aunt Julia. We never rekindled anything, but somehow, through everything, we became friends. Eventually, she met someone, a doctor who truly loved her. The man who tried to liquidate us confessed easily. He had been hired. And the one who had orchestrated it? Bert. For conspiring to commit murder, Bert was sentenced to 10 years. He was dead 2 weeks later. Not from his disability, not from his past mistakes catching up with him, just the way things worked out. I was asked to speak at his funeral, but declined. I still attended, watching the service with a smile. Sometimes people get exactly what they deserve. This isn't the story with a perfect, joyful ending, but for me, it was the best possible one. Everything had finally come full circle. Julia had broken me, but in the end, I got the life I was always meant to have, and I was finally free.